Episode 7, Given to the Prince. Why was Jessica poking her? Sorry, Jessica said, giving Victoria a vigorous shake. I hate to wake you, but you only have an hour to get dressed. Did your nap help? You still look somewhat pale. How could she describe her present state? Death dragged back for the execution, perhaps? Maybe she would have maybe she could drown herself in the shower and end all this misery. I'll be all right. When she turned over and opened her eyes, a superhero stood over her. What a sight. Jessica stood in full regalia as Wonder Woman. Long red hair cascading in a riot of curls across her bare shoulders. Skimpy blue satin shorts and red boots showcased her long, shapely legs. You look fabulous. Exactly who I need tonight. Wonder Woman. Victoria slid out of bed. Would you mind laying out my costume while I take a shower? By the way, what did you get for me? You mean you haven't looked yet? No, I didn't have time. Oh, Victoria, I'm so sorry. You're going to hate me. I thought it would add a little excitement to your otherwise dull existence, but now, well, you're just going to kill me. Victoria got a very, very bad premonition. She lifted the box to remove the lid. The blood-curdling sound of golden bells confirmed her worst fears. Jessica, you did it. Well, how was I supposed to know you would get yourself married to a foreign desert person, a prince no less? Victoria yanked the lid off the box, hoping to find she was wrong. She wasn't. She shook the box at Jessica. I can't wear this. It's indecent. Everyone will think I've lost my mind. When news of your recent nuptials hits the tabloids, everyone will be sure you're insane anyway. So why not have some fun? Victoria stared at the filmy creation and wondered if she possessed the courage. Whether she did or not was a moot point. Time had run out. Picking up the costume, she marched past Jessica and slammed the bathroom door behind her. Someday she was going to choke her friend. Hurry up, Victoria. What is taking you so long? We're going to be late. Victoria tried to ignore Jessica's insistent banging. She was not as eager as her friend to start a war, especially one she was not altogether sure she could win. If you don't come out soon, I'm calling for help. Just a couple more minutes, Victoria mumbled as she listened to the voice penetrating the bathroom door. You know, Victoria, I can't understand how two hunks of male perfection can be so barbaric. You must admit, just looking at them is enough to make mush out of your principles. Your prince has a drop-dead smile, and his friend's cauliflower is gorgeous. Why do men have to ruin everything with their Tarzan mentalities? Victoria tuned out Jessica's continuous chatter and studied her reflection in the mirror. Her hair hung loose, dropping halfway down her back. She tucked some forward to shield the embarrassing amount of cleavage on display. The woman in the mirror projected a mysterious, exotic appearance. No one, upon seeing her, would discern the uncertainty she battled unless she allowed her confidence to falter. A tear rolled down her cheek, and then another. She swiped the tears from her face and jutted her chin upward, challenging the woman in the mirror. She never cried. She'd go to the ball in the costume and dare anyone to question her dignity, especially one very arrogant bully. She pushed open the bathroom door and nearly collided with Jessica. Oh, girl, you look stunning, like you just stepped out of the Arabian Nights. Yes, well, let's hope I don't lose my nerve. Too bad Rashid won't see you. He would turn inside out with jealousy. You're going to have all the men wanting to add you to their harems. Jessica hugged Victoria. We should see about getting your navel pierced. Jessica! Victoria choked in revolt. Don't be absurd. I'm just kidding. Believe me, you don't need any more embellishment. Maybe a bag over my head would help, said Victoria. Victoria unclenched her numb fingers as Jessica pulled the car into position and killed the engine. They slid from the car through doors opened by two parking valets. Victoria paused to scan the small group of people at the entrance of the convention complex. No sign of Rashid or her father. Judging by the small number of people entering the building, they were early, which was good. She needed more time to get used to her costume before more guests arrived. After Jessica outlined her prerequisites for turning over the car keys to the two young attendants, she and Victoria made their way to the ballroom. Miss Ballard, I almost didn't recognize you. You look so cool. Wow. Amber, one of her assistants, did a double take as she walked up. Doesn't she, though? Jessica beamed proudly, as if she were the artist and Victoria the canvas. Victoria, I'm going to check on our musicians. Don't worry. I'll have you in my line of sight at all times. And I'm going to give a heads up to a couple of our hunky waiters. It won't hurt to have some muscle on our side if we need it. Victoria nodded her agreement and noted the direction Jessica took before turning to her assistant. The ballroom was enormous, and she didn't want to lose her general in the throng of guests. Was there something you needed, Amber? Oh, yes, I almost forgot. Miss Collier asked to see you as soon as you arrived. Something about the wine list, I think. Thanks. I'll take care of things from here. You've been a great help. Go and enjoy the evening. I'll send for you if I need anything. Thanks, Miss Ballard. I'll check back later just in case. How nice it would be to have no purpose tonight, but to experience the occasion, instead of bracing for a possible all-out war of the sexes. 8 dances and 2 hours later, with her previous apprehensions proving to be unwarranted, she danced, smiled, and mingled with an excitement born of victory. Her male peers flirted outrageously, and her female peers glared with envy. She sipped on her 4th glass of champagne and giggled inwardly at her own thoughts. She'd always supposed a woman needed to take exceptional care to dress for success. How illogical she'd been. All a woman really needed to do was limit her amount of clothing. If her revealing costume weren't proof enough, the number of men contending for Jessica's attention supported her observations. She sauntered over to where Jessica stood in a circle of admirers. Would you gentlemen excuse us for just a moment? I need to talk to Jessica. I promise to return her to you shortly. 6 men good-naturedly drifted off to find other partners. Looks like everything is going to be just fine, Jessica patted Victoria's arm. No sign of a deranged prince, and you even have some color in your cheeks. Are you okay now? Very well, actually. Apparently, Rashid does have better sense than to make a public fool of himself. Seems to be the case. How are you doing with your costume? Notice you've quit holding your hand over your navel. Jessica giggled. Well, being practically naked did take a little adjustment. I've had a few questioning stares, but mostly good-natured teasing. The presentations will start soon. Shouldn't we be preparing to leave? Jessica scanned the room. You're right. People are starting to make their way back to their tables. I hadn't noticed. One of the waiters seems to be heading our way now with a note in his hand. Guess we better see what he needs first. Excuse me, Miss Ballard, I was asked to give you this note. Taking the note from the waiter's hand, Victoria scanned its content. Please come to the East Conference Room. We have a problem with a guest. What does the note say, Victoria? Anything I should know about? No, just some problem involving a guest. I'll take care of this and then we can leave as planned. Meet me in the East Corridor in about 15 minutes. Okay, but be careful. We still don't know the location of the enemy. I'll have the car brought around and then meet you. Victoria wondered why anyone would choose the East Wing conference room to work out a problem with a guest. Situated on the opposite side of the Civic Center, it was as far away from the ball as one could get. Annoyed, she traversed 3 long hallways. Turning the final corner into the last corridor, she slowed her stride to accustom her eyes to the subdued lighting. She could just make out the shape of 2 men standing in front of the double doors at the end of the hall. The skin at the back of her neck prickled as she negotiated the dim passage. She pushed the tingling sensation from her mind. She wasn't going to give in to any more of her irrational premonitions. Lately, she'd become too much of a drama queen. She drew closer to the 2 men in dark suits. Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Victoria Ballard. Is there a problem we need to discuss? They tipped their heads toward her in a deferential gesture, and then in unison turned and opened the massive set of double doors behind them. An earlier sense of familiarity congealed into stark, terrifying reality. Her limbs stiffened as muscles solidified in panic. This couldn't be happening. She covered her mouth to stop the scream threatening to tear from her throat. There was no light streaming through the open doorway, but she could sense him coming toward her through the darkness beyond. Long, powerful legs draped in billowing white fabric broke through the opening. A grandiose version of an Arab prince bore down on her. If she had thought him formidable in Western clothes, he was omnipotent in traditional Middle Eastern dress. The white fabric emphasized his dark alien threat. When he locked her eyes with the savage heat of his terror rose in her throat. Throwing up both hands to hold him back, she shattered the corridor's silence with the echo of her scream. Her brain shouted the command to flee, but her feet wouldn't move. If you run, I'll catch you. And if you scream again, I'll gag you. Now turn around. Victoria flinched from the sting of his words. She didn't want to provoke him further, but she didn't want to comply either. The opportunity to do otherwise was lost as he spun her in his direction. Losing her balance, she fell against his chest. Rough hands latched onto her arms and pushed her away from his hard body. His glare raked and scored her like talons. Have you no shame to expose yourself for the eyes of any man who cares to see? I should, my lord. Perhaps the princess could use this. Victoria didn't know when Rashid's companion had entered the corridor or what his words meant. She could only watch as he offered Rashid a bundle of black cloth. Rashid ripped the garment from the man's hand and tossed it toward her. Failing to comprehend his gesture, she didn't reach for the cloth. It dropped to puddle around her feet. Cover yourself. He obviously mistook her confusion for defiance and eliminated the last few inches separating them. A serial killer couldn't have been more dangerous. Now she knew what it meant when people said someone had murder in their eyes. Cover yourself, or... The threat in his voice dissolved her paralysis and catapulted her into action. Snatching the robe from the floor, she fumbled, trying to find its opening. Rashid jerked the garment from her hands and shoved the material over her head. The cloth caught on the diamond-studded combs in her hair. Another hard yank freed it to settle on her shoulders and sent her hair combs flying across the corridor. Any more of his assistance and she could end up bald. "Run, Victoria! Run!" She spun toward the scream coming from the far end of the corridor. Wonder Woman sprinted toward her. "What are you doing to my friend? Get your hands off her!" Before Victoria had time to react, bands of steel wrapped around her body and scooped her up in one swift lift. Rashid ignored her struggles and paused long enough to bark a command toward his companion. "Handle that woman." Victoria stared over Rashid's shoulder in horrified silence as his companion intercepted Jessica. Using both hands and feet, Jessica tried to free herself from the man's hold without success. The last thing Victoria heard before the double doors closed behind her and Rashid was Jessica's promise. "I'll find you." Jessica's plight and her own helplessness drained Victoria of what little fight she had left. She didn't struggle against the man who held her high against his chest, while his purposeful stride echoed in the deserted corridors. Before she could gather the presence of mind to wonder at his destination, she was tossed into the back seat of a black limousine. The woman struggled, scratched, bit, and kicked. Cauliflower found her strength formidable. He pressed his hand over her mouth to silence her screams. It would be easier to suffocate her and be done with it. Instead, he tightened his hold, not cutting her air off completely, but enough to make her realize he meant his next words. "Stop. You can only hurt yourself with your useless resistance. You cannot help your friend. She is with her husband where she belongs." He controlled the tone of his voice despite the strain of his emotions. The struggling woman in his arms kicked his heart rate to maximum. Worse was the undeniable arousal she triggered in the rest of his body. He should be disgusted, not stimulated. Resentment outweighed his restraint, and he shook her until she ceased to struggle. Becoming still at last, she lifted her head regally and stared down her haughty nose at him. Since he towered over her by several inches, such an impression testified to the depth of her self-assurance. He spread his feet, bracing for what he could see brewing in her eyes. "How dare you? Where is Victoria? You will not get away with kidnapping an American citizen. I demand to know where you've taken her." "Your demands are of little importance and your threats of no consequence. You are but a foolish woman." She swung a balled fist in the direction of his jaw. Her attempt to do him harm was easily handled, but her persistence was not. The woman was unwise and reckless. Yanking her body to his, he clasped her chin in one hand and held her in place. "Listen well, woman, for I will say this only once. The princess is no longer your concern. Do not overstep your place and interfere. Do not follow or try to contact her." Her glare targeted him like an arrow. "I will find her. I will never stop. Now get your hands off me." Cauliflower rubbed his thumb across her stubborn bottom lip, parting it enough to allow his thumb to press against her clenched teeth. No woman had ever aroused his passions as this one. Why this spitting, viperous female should do so was an aggravation. His thumb slid against her teeth. The moist heat ignited a strong need in him to breach their barrier. Stunning desire put a sharp edge to his declaration. "If you defy me and step into my world, you will will pay the consequences. Don't threaten me. I don't need your permission for anything. I do as I please. The supreme confidence in her expression defied the captivity of her body. She delivered the assertion with a toss of her head, much like a blooded mare would do when rebuffing the attention of one of Prince Rashid's Arabian studs. If I see your face on Ahalamin soil, I will consider that a challenge, one which I will accept and you will lose. You are warned. Without hesitation, he claimed her mouth, accepting no resistance, punctuating his ultimatum with male strength. He controlled the kiss, softening and strengthening the pressure, first devouring and then soothing her sweet lips until her movements became sensual and her moans yielding. He slid his mouth toward her arched neck and paused. She gave him the response he'd been waiting for. Long, tapered fingers grasped the back of his head in an attempt to pull his mouth back to hers. Reveling in his power to stoke the flames of her desire, he gave her what she wanted. She smelled of open places, endless skies, and tasted like forever. Forever. As chilling as a desert night, the word vanquished his fervor. Parting their lips, he pushed her slightly away from his body, holding her by the arms until her trembling legs supported her full weight. Her bereft eyes rose to his, questioning and studying him in silence. He slid 2 fingers down her cheek and over her quivering lips. He hated the battle his mind and body waged. One wanted to stay and claim this strong, desirable woman. The other mocked his weakness. Without a word, he removed his hand, pivoted, and walked away. Victoria half sat, half lay on the limousine's passenger seat. The car's tinted windows shut out all but the brightest lights, plunging her and the devil beside her into deep shadow. She wanted to straighten herself, but the entangling robe imprisoned her better than a rope. The prospect of drawing his attention gave her reason to stay still. How did one deal with the psychopath? A silver bullet, perhaps? Or a stake through his heart? Not possessing either, her wits would have to suffice. She waited and watched him, slowing her breathing to quiet its sound. His familiar spicy scent now mingled with the pungent odor of hot, angry male. One who had just carried her down 2 flights of stairs and through a block of hallways. His scent was no longer exotic, but earthy, raw, dangerous. The only parts of him clearly visible were his hands. Fisted, they rested on his legs. She was sure that whatever caused them to tremble wasn't fear. He hadn't stirred or spoken since the car sped away from the Civic Center. An involuntary gasp escaped her throat when he moved forward and switched on the dome light. Angling his head, he gave her a pitiless glare. Then, locking her eyes with his, he reached to activate the privacy window. The glass partition rose, and so did her panic. The silent authority in his eyes held her as captive, just like the glow bugs she used to collect as a child, the ones she sealed in one of her mother's crystal vases and set on her bedside table, leaving them to expend their last flash of brilliance in captivity. She had never thought the childish act cruel until now. He moved again, this time in her direction. She strained to get one arm free from the robe and looked in every direction for something she could use to defend herself. Nothing appeared. Exhausted, she lay sweating, trembling, and near tears. Through all her struggles, he had simply waited. Now he reached for her. This, she thought, will be tomorrow's headline. Victoria Ballard strangled on her wedding night. Rashid grabbed both sides of her robe and yanked upwards, successfully untangling her body. Then his hand slid under each of her arms, lifting and positioning her against the back of the leather seat. The sound of tinkling bells caused his eyes to widen with renewed disgust. His solid chest rose and fell in short, hard rhythm. Leaning closer still, he invaded the last inch of space between them. When he ran the tip of his finger down her cheek and pushed a lock of hair from her face, her senses somersaulted as if she'd just been propelled off a mountain backward. There was no up, no down, no point of reference to stabilize her emotions. Not until he spoke to her again, his voice deep and raspy. Though you may deserve otherwise, I have no intention of strangling you on our wedding night. How did he know what she was thinking? The ringtone on his cell phone almost splintered her sanity. Sliding back across the seat, he easily dismissed her and spoke with whoever was on the phone in complete calmness. Not one unsteady syllable passed his lips. For that she both envied and despised him. He ended his conversation at the same time the car came to a quick stop. Ignoring her, he vacated the limousine. Dreading his return, she pressed further back against the solid support of her own door. In her next breath, the wall at her back gave way. She would have fallen except for a pair of saving hands. Catching her, he placed her on her feet and then wrapped the fingers of one hand around her arm. To an onlooker, the gesture would appear courteous. An onlooker, however, could never be subjugated by the emphatic firmness of his touch. His sharp instructions to the two men who accompanied him reminded her of just how good he was at giving orders. The two tipped their bodies in a deferential bow and hurried away to do his bidding. She waited for him to start throwing orders at her next. Surprisingly, he stood like a statue in solitary silence, staring across what she realized was a private airfield. What was he thinking? His rigid profile gave no clues. He was a riddle, puzzle, a mystery. She had never been good at solving any of those things. In fact, she hated them. They always defeated her best efforts to master them. No nightmare had ever equaled the wild twist of this horrendous day. Could things get any worse? The hand still holding her arm gave her the answer. A woman alone, manacled to a stranger, a foreigner, a husband. Everything could get much worse. The ignition and roar of jet engines confirmed her conclusion. To the right of them stood a private jet much like her father's. The tarmac lights revealed an insignia she didn't recognize. The loading ramp stood positioned in front of its open door, ready to accept passengers. Sick with fear, she stepped away from the direction of the plane. The movement gained Rashid's attention. Turning to face her, he took both her hands in his. "Look at me, Victoria." Surprised by his gentle tone, she did as he asked. "I realize you are upset and frightened. The events of this day have forever changed the course of both our lives. You are now my wife. Nothing will change this. Accept your position, and I will do all I can to make your life pleasurable and complete." Victoria bit her lip until the pain removed some of the fogginess from her brain. For the first time, she sensed another side to the complicated stranger in front of her, a more temperate, kinder man. His benevolence was a powerful magnetic force. Her exhausted shoulders slumped. If she had known him under normal circumstances, possibly she could have liked him just a little. An opportunity he'd forfeited by trickery and manipulation. She could only be his possession, never his equal. Reaching deep for the rage she had let slip away, she jutted her chin forward and with a defiant stare issued her own ultimatum. The deserts of your country will shiver under blankets of snow before I'll follow you. In addition, I make you this promise, Mr. DeBar. Unless you let me go, I'll do everything in my power to make your life a living nightmare. He fettered both her wrists with one powerful hand, lifting them until they were directly in front of her face. You can no more break my will than you can free your hands. You have but one option, and that is to accept your position. Now you can board the plane dragged like a child, or you can walk like the royal princess you are. This choice only is yours. How big of you to give me a choice. Victoria yanked her hands, but to no avail. She always seemed to be on the wrong end of his obsession with obedience. Forced into a situation of compliance or defeat, she made herself a vow. Someday she'd make him suffer the same crushing humiliation he'd imposed on her. Mollified by the prospect of his defeat, she decided to humor him a little longer. If you'll let go of me, I'll move under my own power. He released her hands and swung his arms wide open. How she would love to reduce him to a pile of ashes and then toss them into the first dumpster she could find, or better yet, she would flush them down the nearest toilet. You must know the situation is despicable. She threw up her hands in disgust. Only a worthless degenerate would have to buy himself a wife. I loathe you. The hateful man didn't even blink. Walk or be dragged, which do you prefer? Acting on crazed instinct, she did the only thing which came to mind. Kicking out with all her strength, she connected with Rashid's leg. An outraged groan slipped through his lips as he jerked backwards and grabbed his injured limb. Seeing her opportunity, she ran toward the nearest building. Her toes throbbed. The man really was made of steel. Her useless satin slippers afforded little protection from the hard gray concrete, and the bells around her ankles mocked her every stride with their incessant tinkling. Wanting to see if Rashid was in pursuit, she glanced, looking around. Elated, she saw he still nursed what she hoped was a broken leg. Her lungs lost all air as she slammed into a solid object and ricocheted backward. The pain of landing forcefully on her bottom filled her eyes with tears. Looking to see what she had run into, she was mortified to see Rashid's companion looking down at her with incredulous shock. A wet chill seeped through her robe. With miles of dry concrete on both sides, she had managed to land in the middle of an oily puddle the size of Lake Erie. Unadulterated rage burned in her chest and spewed from her throat in a piercing scream of disbelief. Spatters of slimy, dank sludge clung to her face as she repeatedly beat her small fist against the pavement.